We're here today celebrating the holiest day of the Christian year, Easter. Christians across the world are gathering to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And Ernest Holmes, our founding father, defined resurrection as rising from a belief in death. This morning, throughout the world, there are thousands of religious leaders that are seeking to explain what this 2,000-year-old celebration is and what it means in the ancient rite in terms of our lives today. Mostly they're concerned with who and what Jesus was and how we should look at his death and resurrection, how Jesus died for us. And many of those religious leaders are expressing his death specifically for our sins and why we should be eternally grateful for him doing so, even though we don't deserve it. And I'm sure you're not surprised that that's not the message that I have for you today. You know, it was written that Jesus was crucified and then rose again. He exemplified the immortality of the soul through his crucifixion and resurrection. And whether or not we believe the story, even metaphorically, it's well taken by all who listen and contemplate the meaning. Ernest Holmes also said that our conclusion is not that dead men live again, but a living man never dies. And knowing this changes everything about life here on this planet. We're not mortals waiting to become immortal in some far-off place. We now and always have been immortal. And to me, that is the truth. Easter actually is a myth, but yet it speaks deeply to each one of us, and we probably wouldn't be watching or gathering if you decided to join us in the festivities today. The truth is that you and I have nothing to do with Easter. Jesus said as much when his last words were, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The soldiers may not have known what they were doing, but Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. He was in full command of himself and the entire experience from his trial through the crucifixion, through the resurrection. None of us know exactly what that experience was. We only know what's contained in the poetic language of the Bible that was written years after the event. And nobody knows for sure what part was real and what part was symbolic. Here's a few things to think about. Are you aware that Easter was named for Astro or Astara, who was a Teutonic goddess of spring? And it was a celebration of renewal and resurrection long before Jesus was even born. There were eggs. There were ancient Persian and Egyptian eggs that were dyed red. And there was an Easter bunny because the hair was the fertility symbol in ancient Egypt. There was the Paschal lamb from Passover, and ham represented a break from Judaism. Not wearing an article of new clothing for Easter was considered bad luck, and that's how the Easter bonnet came about. The resurrection is not a fact. It is an article of faith. We find the death and resurrection story in the Egyptians' Book of the Dead that was written centuries before Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and centuries before Jesus was born. Jesus certainly lived, and it is undoubtedly true that he was crucified for what he taught. And it's probably true that they rolled back the stone from the tomb and the body was gone. Where it went is still conjecture today. Jesus of Arimathea may have had the body taken away and buried elsewhere. Some stories have us believe that Jesus did not actually die but went to India. And others maintain that Jesus and Mary Magdalene went to England, which William Blake celebrated in his famous poem referred to as Chariots of Fire. And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the Holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? It really doesn't matter. None of those versions in any way change the underline of what Jesus said and did. It doesn't matter whether he actually appeared to the disciples or whether metaphorically it was the truth that he taught them during his lifetime, which became alive in them after his death. Did you know that more people have reported seeing Elvis Presley after his death than ever reported seeing Jesus after the resurrection? If people wanted to see a resurrected Jesus, that's what they saw. One truth that Jesus taught us, which is fundamental to our teaching, is as a man thinketh in his or her heart, so is he. And in our philosophy, we know that what we think can come about. Our thoughts are powerful. The power of the mind to create religious visions is quite evident. Think about the stigmatic saints who actually have been reported bleeding from their palms and from their feet. They're bleeding in the same way that the medieval paintings of the crucifixion depict Jesus nailed to the cross through his palms. In actual practice, they drove the nails through the wrist so that it could support the body. So it's possible that the stigmatic saints may have just envisioned that so deeply, so much that they believed in Jesus, that they brought about this bleeding within them. It may or may not represent holiness, but it certainly demonstrates the power of the mind. Even in our New Thought movement, we've had many healers who have mentally and emotionally took on whatever their patients were experiencing so that they could clear out the consciousness of their patients. Now, I don't recommend that, but it is a way that people actually can show the power of their thoughts. Let's get back to the resurrection. The idea of resurrection is age old, yet never before the example of Jesus did it have such an impact on so many people that even today we continue to enact the drama of the crucifixion and the resurrection. In ancient teachings, souls of the departed went through a series of purifications on their way to becoming gods, stripping away whatever they carried with them until they emerged as pure spirit. And it's believed that only a few were going to make it. Jesus taught that we're already God in expression, and we're all going to make it. That we already are making it right here, right now, and that we'll continue to do so wherever we go from here. Jesus went through the trial and crucifixion experience with such authority that few doubted that it was true for him, that he knew his true nature. But many of us are still debating whether it's true for the rest of us, unless, as many traditional churches advocate, we make a concerted effort to be like Jesus or to invite Jesus into our hearts. The essence of Jesus' teaching was the Christ consciousness is already incarnate in each of us, awaiting only our recognition of it. Let me say that again. The essence of Jesus' teaching was that the Christ consciousness is already incarnate in each of us, awaiting only our recognition of it. And actually, that's the real reason he was crucified. People did not want to accept the idea of their own divinity and the responsibility that goes with that. How do we know that? It's right there in the symbolism of the choice that the people made between Jesus and Barabbas. Pilate gave them a choice. Do you want Jesus or do you want Barabbas? And the people, rather than choosing Jesus, the I am, chose Barabbas, the I am not. Up until now, the Easter story has been presented largely in terms of personal salvation. demonstrating that by dying to the old, we can be born again in the new. The truth is, by letting go of whatever binds us, no matter how comfortable we may be with it, whether it's addiction, illness, debt, a miserable relationship, a dead-end job, procrastination, lack of education or opportunity, or any of 1,000 reasons we may have for living a less than fulfilling life and staying with the status quo, once we become willing to release that, to let go of our stories, we are already moving into the resurrection experience. It does take a willingness. Ernest Holmes wrote, "We love the idea of the resurrection, but it's very difficult for us to unwrap the shroud of our previous experience." We're all too familiar with the crucifixion. Most of us have spent a lot of our lives bearing some kind of cross. We get so fascinated with it that we can't get past it. We tell the story to our friends over and over again, to anybody that will listen. This movement in New Thought and in religious science of mind in particular, I would say, there are numbers, thousands of people who have experienced a resurrection, and maybe perhaps many resurrections in their lives after learning how to use the power of the mind, how to break through seemingly insurmountable barriers. That's the power. Ernest Holmes said in every talk show and radio show and many of his TV broadcasts, there is a power of good in the universe which is greater than you are, and you can use it. And I know you've heard me use those words before. The words of Jesus, "Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit," imply a supreme confidence in the universe and in the immortality of the soul. And for Easter, they are actually fraught with particular significance. Jesus knew the soul to be immortal. He said, "In my Father's house are many mansions." And he taught that this planet is but one of the innumerable planes for the soul on its ever-expanding pathway of self-unfoldment. Oftentimes, we don't even recognize the crucifixions of our own lives. We don't recognize them for what they really are, gateways to a higher consciousness. They need not be painful experiences, at least not if we know what they're leading to. The pain is in not going through the experience. It's far more painful to stay with an addiction to scarcity or low self-esteem than it is to move into the higher level of knowing our own abundance. And yet, there are those we find it extremely difficult to let go of a way of living that ultimately brings only misery. It's become so familiar and a part of their identity, consciously or unconsciously, that it's difficult to let go, as Holmes said earlier. Can you imagine a worse hell than having everything you want right in front of you and not being able to enjoy any of it, while still holding on to the hope that the next time it might be different? Yet, we as humans participate in that hell quite frequently, do we not? We place our own belief system between us and our God. So on this Sunday, this Easter day, I invite you to cross out whatever it is not working for you in your lives and rise up to a new way of living. Giving up the old is never painless, whether it be an addiction, a job you don't really like, a relationship that's turned over. Few things are more painful than childbirth, yet look at the joy that comes from it. And by the way, most mothers get past that pain or we wouldn't have families with more than one child. Can you imagine what would have happened if Jesus, in his ministry, at the last moment said, "I quit, I'm out of here"? Jesus knew what lay ahead. There wasn't anything he had to do on this plane that to him was any more important than what he was about to demonstrate. And few forms of death are more painful than the crucifixion, which typically took many hours or even sometimes days. Yet according to the Gospel of Mark, Jesus carried his cross to the exact spot of his crucifixion and then went through that crucifixion in less than an hour. Pontius Pilate himself was surprised at how quickly it was over. Jesus proved his point. Even though the people of Jerusalem chose Barabbas, one by one, more and more people are coming to accept the idea of their own divinity, to avail themselves of the power and the wisdom that is available to us through the medium of a universal mind, which responds to our thought. And so we seek to live accordingly, to live as God's representatives in this world. Perhaps that's why the law of attraction got so much hype. Individually, more and more of us have come to accept the idea of our own divinity, which is the real doctrine of salvation that Jesus taught. And I think Jesus had an even higher vision, one that has come to the forefront in this particular century. So there are really two aspects to Jesus' higher vision. The first one is that each of us is a divine expression of God, created by God out of itself and endowed with all divine qualities. We are more than creations of God. We're co-creators with God of all the experiences and are given all the authority we need to determine just what they are. Up until now, each of us has been discovering for ourselves this divinity. We may have been so caught up in doing our own thing that we forgot that we're each part of a larger being called humankind. And that brings us to the second aspect, which we might call the second coming. Just as we are evolving individually in consciousness, so is that larger entity of which we're all a part, humankind. It's what's happening now and in this century that I think is going to accelerate. It's not political or cultural. It's a spiritual process. A spiritual process that's taking place in the one medium that we all share, that one mind. Undoubtedly, it would show itself politically and culturally, as it always does intellectually and financially in the world market. And there's global information such as the internet or social media like Facebook and Twitter, LinkedIn. You can argue about where we come from and you can argue about where we're going. The truth is, the important thing is, what are we doing while we're here? I firmly believe that we're here to learn how to be God. That this is a training ground for cosmically conscious living in a state of oneness with the allness of the divine. The real action is taking place in the soul of mankind. It's here that the oneness is beginning to grow and deepen and break through into a conscious awareness. At the subjective level, I believe that each one of us can feel this sense of oneness with each other and with all of mankind. Yet at the conscious level, it's still pretty much of an intellectual idea for a lot of us, and an ideal that's yet to be realized. Consciously and objectively, we are most likely still more aware of our separateness and what divides us than what unites us. But I think that's beginning to change, and there's a major paradigm shift. There's nothing absolute about this new century. It's a new century because we say it is. The universe could care less about our designation of time. And I say very often that in God's time, there is no human time. We're moving into a major paradigm shift because each of us have felt it's about time, and that feeling is breaking through our conscious awareness. You wouldn't be here listening to this message if you didn't believe, at least on some level, what I just said. For me, it's grown far beyond a concept to being a firm conviction, whether or not I live to experience that whole change on this plane in my lifetime. The concept of conscious evolution is that what we now share subconsciously as universal subjective mind is evolving into a universal conscious mind in which we're totally aware of each other's thoughts and feelings, and yet completely our own individual selves, our own individual expressions of God. Again, our universal subconscious mind, it's evolving into the universal conscious mind so that we become aware of our oneness while truly still expressing as individual expressions of the divine. We won't lose our identity in the process of recognizing this oneness. If anything, we'll become more completely ourselves because we won't have to hide who or what we are, and we'll be able to freely and fully express ourselves, recognizing our oneness in love. Even though as a race we're not there yet, although some of us may well be well on our way, I think it is time to start acting as though we were there already. Certainly the need is very important. When you look at the problems of the world, they can be overwhelming, seemingly well beyond anything that you or I can do about them individually. Yet there's really a lot we can do and would do well because we are involved. Whatever we're consciously aware of, because it's consciously affecting our own thinking, we're involved in. To the extent that we think about something or talk about it, we're involved. And even if we try to avoid thinking about something or talking about it, we're still involved. So what is it that we can do? This past week, I issued a Holy Week challenge to flip any negative thoughts into positive ones. That's certainly a great place to start. The consciousness of oneness that is now beginning to emerge has to come through the hearts and minds of those who are presently involved in today's struggles. When we're caught up in the swirl of events, we may lose sight of who and what we truly are. And it's up to us to recognize the spiritual basis for unity and harmony, because it already exists. It's up to us to call it forth. It's not easy to look at what's going on in the world today and not feel outrage. It's very human to feel pain and suffering associated with that. And it doesn't help if you're not in a position to do something about it. When we're not in a position to help, there's not much we can do in terms of direct action, but there's a lot we can know in our own consciousness. It starts with a higher vision. You and I know from what we demonstrated in our own lives that there are no unsolvable problems, no incurable illnesses. There may be problems that we don't know how to solve or are unwilling to solve, just as there are illnesses that we don't know how to cure, and people who don't want to be cured, actually. But there's nothing on earth beyond the power of God to solve and to heal. If we start from a higher vision, the vision that I see is the outgoing evolution of universal conscious mind, where all of us make up the body of humankind, and all of us are consciously aware of each other's thoughts and feelings. There is a consciousness that can only exist in an atmosphere of total, unconditional love, where we need not fear anyone or anything. We need not fear that someone else knows what we're thinking. We don't have anything to hide. If we start from that vision and know that it's evolving right now, despite whatever's going on around us, we can know that every problem that we face can and will be resolved in the best way possible for everyone involved. It's essential that we don't allow ourselves to get sidetracked by fear, doubt, or the lure of compromise. For us to be effective in our prayers, it's not enough to believe that or to hope that it's possible. Our job is to know that oneness is where we're heading and that no power on earth can stop it. The idea of conscious evolution, the eventual emergence of the universal conscious mind, is already so well established that it must manifest. It doesn't take many people to know the truth for something to manifest. Actually, it only takes one. But if it's locked up inside the mind of only one person, nothing happens until he or she actually communicates it to someone else. So I guess it takes two. Bill W., the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is most definitely the greatest self-help movement on the planet, had the idea for quite a while, but it didn't manifest. Nothing happened until he shared it with another alcoholic, Dr. Bob. The result of that simple sharing led to the salvation and resurrection of millions of people from the degradation of addiction. There aren't a lot of people as yet who subscribe to the idea of conscious evolution, but it is a growing number. In his latest years, Ernest Holmes wrote a book, Open at the Top, and declared that he was one of them in his chapter, Ernest Holmes, Conscious Evolutionary. I firmly believe, in fact, I'm absolutely certain, that this is what has been called the second coming. The two aspects I spoke about earlier. First, the realization of the Christhood of every individual, and that came through Jesus. And second, the realization of the universal Christhood of humanity, which is now emerging. And it's only from that realization, whether you call it that or not, that the ethnic and cultural conflicts that are breaking out all over the world can truly be solved. Otherwise, world peace or anything approximating it just remains a perennial, impossible dream. You and I both know that it's happening. I hope you were listening to the words of the song Amazing Things right before the message. You will do amazing things. The song went on to say, you don't have to work it out, just be in the here and now. We don't have to know when or how, only that it is. By knowing and by thinking, speaking and acting in accordance with that knowing, there's no stopping it. And as I said just a couple seconds ago, when you know something in the depths of your being, the universe, all of the universe comes to support it. The power of that one mind. The song goes on to say, let your mind rest for a little while. Sometimes deepest answers come when you're out there having fun. So I suggest that you plant that seed of knowing and then go on with your life. Go out and have some fun. My mama used to say that when I was ready, I would walk away from those things in my life that were not supporting my joy. It's more like the pain of staying had to become greater than the fear of leaving and moving into something that was unfamiliar. There may be pain along the way. The pain of being locked into the old way, or the pain of letting go and moving into the new, not knowing what's new. Sooner or later, as it has for so many of us, the pain of not letting go, of carrying our crosses, will outweigh the pain of letting go. And the pain of letting go will quickly pass as the glory of the new emerges. That's the lesson of the crucifixion and the resurrection. for us individually in our lives and collectively as a humankind. There's a new world order that's emerging right now through the power of the mind. And it will limit no one. And it's going to give greater freedom to everyone. No one will have to give up the right to be miserable, but they won't have the right to make anyone else miserable either, unless the other party chooses to be miserable. All of this is entirely in keeping what we know about spirit. That spirit expressing as life through love has only one purpose: to express more and more of itself in ever new and more wonderful ways as us. It's Easter. That's what's happening. It's happening right here and right now, happening through us. And we make it so by our recognition and accepting of this one life. We make it so. So let me say this. Regardless of the challenges we may be facing individually in our daily lives, of the crosses we're carrying, or of the many crosses of the world, which could easily depress anyone who lets himself get caught up in it, we know the truth. The truth that life, love, God always has more to express in, through, and as each of us. We dedicate ourselves to living accordingly. That in and of itself is absolutely guaranteed to move us into an ever higher level of living until we reach that ultimate expression of life, which is pure joy. That's our destiny. That's what makes the Easter message so glorious. That we are letting go of the crosses and rising up to all of our full potential by recognizing we have the power of the one life that is God's life, that is our life, right here, right now. So let's pray. Taking a deep, nourishing breath. Just recognizing the two levels of vision that Jesus so well demonstrated. That personal demonstration of moving through whatever's happening in our lives and saying yes to it, knowing that what comes after is so much joy. And that second vision of the second coming of us knowing that on this planet we can know as a group, as a community, as a number of individuals coming together, that there is a oneness that connects all of us and that is working in, through, and as each of us to create a much better life. What I know to be the truth is that the God without is indeed living in, through, and as each of us as love. And that everything on this planet is love expressing. So it's from the gratitude of that knowing, that I release these words into the law of mind, spirit, and action, knowing the truth, that God has already called it good, that there's nothing that we need to beseech or request. It's already done just by the knowing it to be true. God's already said yes, so I can just let it be. I say amen, and let's affirm it together. And so it is.